Well, good morning. It's Reverend Mike Capron from the First Presbyterian Church of Elmwood Park. I'm here for another sermon, this time on Matthew, beginning of chapter 5, the famous Beatitudes that Jesus gives as the intro to the Sermon on the Mount. Here's how it goes. Now, when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him, and he began to teach them. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Now that's our core text for today, but you have to also listen to what happened at the end of chapter 4, the part that came before this. Starting in verse 23, Jesus went throughout Galilee, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness among the people. News about him spread all over, and people brought to him all who were ill with various diseases, those suffering severe pain, the demon-possessed, those having seizures, and the paralyzed, and he healed them. Large crowds followed him. That's the crowds we hear referred to at the beginning of chapter 5. Now, I'm not going to mince words here. The people in these crowds were not the cream of the crop. They were not successful. They had a lot of health problems, lots of physical illnesses and lots of mental illnesses. And they weren't respected. No one in these crowds would have been featured on Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. They just kept following Jesus around, presumably because they wanted help and he helped them. Furthermore, they probably needed love and he loved them. In chapter 5, verse 1, Jesus sees the crowds and goes up higher on the mountain. When he sat down, his disciples came to him. Who are these disciples? Well, it's not the 12 apostles. Jesus has met only 4 so far in Matthew: Peter and Andrew, James and John. And I'm guessing he must have had other people who thought of themselves as his disciples, and maybe Jesus thought of them that way too, and maybe he didn't. So the boundary line between the disciples and the crowd is slim to non-existent. And in any event, he's talking to the disciples, but he's also talking to the crowd. Matthew 7:28-29 says that now at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, when Jesus had finished saying all these things, the crowds were amazed at his teaching, because he taught as one who had authority and not as teachers of the law. He knows that this crowd of losers is listening and taking it all in. Whoever these disciples are, they aren't his only audience. Now, I just used the word losers in that sentence, and in a sense, I stand by it. I don't mean that Jesus thought of them as losers, and I'm not suggesting that we should. Quite the opposite, actually. Jesus cared about them and loved them. But the larger society did indeed think of them as losers, and that is exactly the point that Jesus is addressing in the Beatitudes. Let's take the first Beatitude. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. There is a certain temptation for people who are sitting in a comfortable church pew or in a comfortable chair at home to think of being poor in spirit as some blessed mystical state that we should aspire to attain. But frankly, we might better understand all of this if we were sitting on the ground as we considered the Sermon on the Mount. How long has it been since any of us have spent an hour sitting on the damp and rocky ground? Or perhaps if we just used the variant from Luke, which simply says, blessed are the poor, no spirit involved. Maybe if all of us had skipped breakfast and no one had had any coffee yet, maybe that would help us to get into the right mindset. I'm grateful to a commentator, Dr. David Garland, for his insights into this passage. He says that Jesus' formula of calling people blessed was a common one at the time, not just in the Bible, but outside the Bible, right? So he suggests that maybe a better word would be congratulations. That's thought-provoking, so I'm going to go with it. Some uses from outside the Bible go something like this. Congratulations for having both money and a good mind so you know how to use it. Or congratulations for your happy life, your lovely bride, excellent children, wisdom, knowledge, honor, wealth, and fame. Well, that does sound like a good life, doesn't it? So when Jesus comes out with congratulations to those who mourn, people's ears perk up and they get a weird look. I've led a number of grief support groups over the years, and I don't think I've ever congratulated anyone on their loss. What in tarnation could Jesus mean by that? Well, Garland suggests that it might mean something like this. Mourners are those who see the suffering of this present age as it is. They are not duped by the world's charms. Their penitent distress over failings and tragedies generates their yearning for God to make things right. Then there's congratulations to the meek. The meek are powerless. They are fortunate because they are more likely to welcome God's sovereignty, unlike the people who run the kingdom of this world. The people who run the world the way it is, the winners, don't want any change that might topple them from their thrones. They are in no hurry to pray, your kingdom come. They will be perfectly happy if the Father remains in heaven and they keep running things down here. But the meek, they understand their complete dependence on God. They are ready for God's kingdom to come in full. So congratulations, you meek. I need to confess to you, brothers and sisters, that I am ashamed that in all these years of preaching on the Sermon on the Mount, I have never really tied it with the identity of the crowds described in chapter 4. I want the sermon to be for veteran disciples like me, advanced students, with the hoi polloi a bit further down the mountain, barely able to hear while Jesus speaks to me. But not so. If we take those verses from Matthew 7 seriously, Jesus' primary audience was the crowd. And if we take Matthew 4 seriously, that crowd was full of sick people, people with chronic pain, people possessed by evil spirits, people having seizures they can't control, people who've had strokes or MS, or other forms of paralysis. They were poor, they were not respected, they had no political power, and their life was full of tragedy. But Jesus says that they are blessed. And are blessed, present tense, continuing tense. He does not say they will be blessed in the future when they get their act together. They are blessed right now, and that it is their hardships which have prepared them for the kingdom. Let me go back to that word loser. It's so problematic. First, it could mean that you need to alter yourself to become a winner. Thereby, it puts burdens on people who are already burdened enough. It adds blame to hardship and makes people feel guilty for things which are often out of their control. It is the opposite of what Jesus is about. His mission is to proclaim good news to the poor and to those who are held captive in a variety of ways. Luke 4. One of the most insidious parts about being labeled a loser is the stigma. Other people look at you and judge you, and since you are all probably already judging yourself and feeling unworthy like a loser, the messages from outside only make things worse, especially in the world of the Pharisees, where you might be declared religiously unclean and no one is supposed to touch you. One of the most horrific things that can happen to someone is to be isolated from their community. Labeling and stigma tend to produce that effect. And so they're very dangerous. All of which leads to the next problem with the word loser. Using the word implies that it's a constant state. Once a loser, always a loser. And that is also a lie. It asserts that we are defined by our circumstances in life. It claims that our poverty is actually our identity. For sick people, it asserts that we are our illness and that our illness constitutes our identity. And Jesus is not saying that either. On the contrary, he is saying that our struggles in life may prepare us for the full reign of God in ways that other people are not prepared. Hence, congratulations, you are truly blessed. And the most important part of this good news is that we don't have to pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps to be saved. Even people who think they can do that are probably wallowing around in a morass of pride and self-aggrandizement. It's hard for the rich to enter the kingdom of God. Matthew 19, starting at verse 21, look it up. The fundamental issue is that of shame and pride. The people the people that Jesus is calling blessed have problems and are assigned stigma. That leads them to be ashamed, and if they internalize that message, then they don't believe that they can be loved or saved. Therefore, the gospel message that we are not saved by our works or accomplishments is good news to them. It is such good news that it is hard for them to believe that it could possibly apply to them, but it does. Jesus died on the cross for them. Jesus rose to new life to show them that they too are destined for new life. The rich people, the accomplished people, the so-called winners, they have the opposite problem. They feel good about their works and think perhaps it would be comforting if their salvation came from their works. They are deluding themselves, of course, but the world keeps sending them messages of approval and affirmation, the opposite of stigma. So they have a hard time grasping the good news that their salvation arises from the execution of a homeless Jewish criminal circa 33 AD. That doesn't seem quite right to them, so they are likely to seek other explanations and may wander off the narrow path. They would have an easier time if they were poor in spirit or so mistreated by the world that they were desperately hungry and thirsty for righteousness. Then the death and resurrection of Christ would make more sense, be more reasonable. Then they would be in the kingdom of heaven, and they would truly inherit the earth if only they could see and understand the good news. And I hope everyone hearing my voice wherever they are can internalize this good news of God's love for them and God's great acts in Jesus Christ of mercy, kindness, love, forgiveness, and grace that we access through faith. God bless everyone. Take care. Amen.